promise. But I'm here today to talk to you about empowering early career developers. So in this talk, I'm going to cover why empowering your early career team members is so important, the process I've been using on my team, and then I'm going to break down some strategies and a framework for you to build a process like this that's personalized to you and your team. So like I was introduced, I'm Mercedes Bernard. I'm an engineering manager at Tandem. We're a small web consultancy here in Chicago. We're in Wicker Park. I'm going to have two shameless plugs in this talk. This is my first one. We are hiring. We're a super mentorship-driven organization. We're very diverse and motivated. So I will be at the happy hour. If you want to talk about it, come talk to me. I'd love to get to know you. All right. So I want you all to think back on your career progression. How did you get to where you are today? How did you grow from an intern or an apprentice or whatever your entry-level position was to your current role? Did it feel a little bit like trial by fire? Or what about like drinking from a waterfall? So I know my experience did. In my first job, I was still in college. I had just gotten hired as a consultant, and I was forced to deal with really unrealistic client expectations when my client wanted me to deploy untested code to production at 1 a.m, and I didn't have any team lead or any senior developer there to help me through that. And then in my next job, right after I graduated, a large payment transaction project fell in my lap that had been poorly estimated by someone else. And again, I didn't have anyone in a senior role there to support me while I tried to navigate how to deliver on these just wildly unrealistic expectations. And unfortunately, I don't think my experience is uncommon. There has to be a better way. In my current role, I'm leading a team of developers. We've grown from 6 to 10. And it's not my first time leading a team, but it is my first time leading a team that's this large, and where I share responsibility for their professional growth, and they're also at way varying experience levels. This is my second shameless plug of the night, and I promise it's my last one. I also run a community here in Chicago called Dev Together. Some of you may have heard of it before. Dev Together connects people who are starting their development careers with technical mentors. We meet once a month. We do code review and pairing events. We're always looking for sponsors, so if you or your company would be interested. But regardless, whether you want to be a mentee or a mentor, we love to have you. But both of these experiences, leading a team with a lot of less experienced developers and working with this community and trying really hard to support people trying to get their first development job, it's opened my eyes to the tremendous need in our industry for solid mentorship and coaching for those early in their career. Which brings me to the problem with our current technology market. Companies are scared to invest in junior talent right now. If you look at any of the job boards, everybody's trying to hire teams of Rockstar junior devs, and in my opinion, this is a losing strategy. It costs so much money to hire a team of senior devs. Their salaries are higher. The 15 to 25% recruiting commission, if you use a recruiter, is higher. You have the attrition cost caused by lack of growth opportunities, because if everyone on your team is a senior, where do they grow? How do they grow? And not every task on a project requires a senior developer, right? Companies are overpaying for talent to do things that, an early career developer could be challenged by and could grow from, because they just want all seniors, because they think all seniors is the only way to get anything done. It costs less to mentor these early career devs than it does to hire the team of all seniors. And the argument that your senior developers don't have the time to mentor your less experienced engineers isn't valid. Your mid and senior engineers need experience mentoring and coaching if you want to grow them into the team leads and those amazing managers that teams want to work with. It's an unfortunate reality in this industry that job hopping is often the easiest and the quickest way to level up. And I understand why this would make a lot of companies hesitant to invest in their early career talent. You worry after you spend all of this time, money, and energy coaching them, learning, and leveling up their skills, they're just going to leave to go chase a mid or senior title at a different company. But where do you think senior developers come from? Somebody I was talking to made the joke of the senior developer stork, and it's not real. Like, we all started somewhere. We were all an early career developer at one point. People who feel valued and who are challenged and have the support of their leads and their managers are more likely to stay than those who are given busy work or other, intern work, and because they're just going to leave to find somewhere that values them or find somewhere to use their skills. So I've been reflecting on how best to offer mentorship and coaching to meet this need. We need to empower our early career talent if we want to retain them and grow them into the senior devs that we're all looking for. So the title of this talk, and I'm sure you've noticed me say it quite a bit, is Empowering Early Career Developers. I'm staying as far away from the word junior as I can. I hate the term junior developer. I'm trying to get rid of it out of my vocabulary. Tandem, we're actually rolling out a new career ladder where we've completely eliminated the junior title. I'm very proud of that. So why is reframing junior as early career so important? Junior has a negative connotation. I don't think it's warranted, and I don't think it's earned, but there are many who view junior as probationary or other forms of less than, rather than as somebody who's learning and growing. And when you identify someone as junior, because of the negative connotation, it causes imposter syndrome to abound, to flare up constantly. If you are using the term junior to refer to somebody and that person assumes that you think it means they're less than, they're going to feel less than every time you use it and every time you call them a junior. And just because this is somebody's first development job doesn't mean that they're junior. Career switchers bring so many transferable skills, and often it's the communication and leadership skills, soft skills, that are the most challenging to teach and to learn on the job. Early career developers bring fresh perspectives and no bad habits to unlearn. And in my experience, early career developers bring all of the enthusiasm and none of the arrogance that can be kind of common with us senior technologists. So shouldn't we use positive language when we're talking to these people instead of labeling them as junior? So let's shift gears for just a moment and talk about the other end of the spectrum. And let's talk about senior devs. So I'm sure everyone has ideas for them, what they think define a senior or a lead developer. For me personally, I break it into two main categories of skills and experience. So for me, a senior dev has strong technical communication, time management, meeting facilitation, consulting, and client engagement skills. But they also have experience making decisions, being held accountable to those decisions, looking at the big picture beyond just a feature checklist, and leading a team. Your list may look different than mine depending on what kind of development you do or what kind of company you work at, and that's totally okay. We all have different career paths. This is just, in my experience, what I look for. So how do you foster growth for someone in their early career to a senior dev who exhibits all of these traits? You need to give them the opportunity to do all of these things before they have the senior or the lead role. You need to put sustainable practices in place for them to grow these skills. Remember, we don't want a trial by fire experience the first time we put them in a lead role. So on my current project, we've been putting processes in place to facilitate these types of opportunities. So I'm going to just really briefly walk you through what we've done, what we've learned, and how you can bring something like this to your team. I think the most valuable part of this talk is that last part. I love making frameworks and step-by-step guides. So I'm going to kind of breeze through the what we've done. So if you have questions, just grab me at Franklin Tap. Again, I love step-by-step guides. So I made a fancy little framework. Prepare, propose, practice. So I'm going to be using that as we talk about this. So step 1 is prepare. I had a conversation with my manager to try to think of how we can support the professional growth of my team. So that's kind of where this entire idea came from. And in the conversation, it started by trying to consider, how am I, as the lead developer, the team lead, the most senior engineer on the project, how am I a silo? And what roles and responsibilities do I have that my team doesn't get insight into and they don't get to practice? On my team, it was technical communication, so I owned almost all of the technical communication with our client. And frankly, even our least experienced engineer was ready to be put in front of a client and to own some of that client communication. So after reflecting on how I'm preventing my team from getting some of these opportunities, I spent some time to define the purpose of, okay, if I'm going to put a process in place, what do I want to achieve? What's my purpose going to be for doing this? This is the purpose that I came up with. So for all of my team members to gain consulting, client engagement, and leadership experience. And the way that I went about achieving this purpose is each member of my team, regardless of their experience level, is owning a feature area of the application. I'll dig in a little more about what that means. But before I told the team about it, I had to prepare myself to delegate, which is the hardest thing to do if you are a new lead or a new senior or a new manager. And it's also the biggest challenge for me personally, because I'm a perfectionist, and so micromanagement is a challenge. And the way that I started to think about it that helped me come to terms with how do I be a good delegator is to think about the fact that even when a pilot is landing a plane, they're not doing it alone. So the FAA actually requires 3 ground crew people to be on the ground underneath the plane to help the pilot. Because the pilot has to perfectly center the plane on this white J line that's painted on the tarmac, and they have to line up the door behind them that we all exit out of with the jetway bridge. So they actually have one person who stands under the nose of the plane, and they have one under either side of the wing. And the way that I thought about it is those people are absolutely vital to the pilot getting the plane to the jetway bridge, but they're not in the cockpit doing it for the pilot, right? They're just paying attention, being aware, and directing them hey, go this way, hey, go that way. So that's what I tried to do. So after I prepared, got ready to let go of all my micromanaging tendencies, it was time to propose the plan to my team. So the whole point of bringing this to my team was to make sure to create a shared understanding and also to get their feedback about what they think about the idea, how they're feeling, and then get their suggestions. So these were the responsibilities for feature ownership that we came up with. These might serve as ideas that you could potentially use, and I'm going to dig into each of them a little bit. So the first part of owning a feature in the application is being the client's point of contact for that feature. So as a feature owner, the team member is responsible for facilitating all of the communication with the client relevant to that application area. They get practice asking questions of clients, holding the clients accountable to communication deliverables, and also being on the flip side and having to answer questions about features, timelines, and priority. So next, the feature owners need to document the system, the user stories, different access requirements, the needs of their feature, the needs of their user, pretty much everything you can think of. And I know that documentation kind of gets a bad rap. It's not a flashy part of consulting, but it is really, really important. So good documentation and written communication skills in general are often really underrated. And we as an industry have a tendency to oversimplify the amount of effort and skill it takes to write good documentation. I mean, there's an entire career for technical writing. And so I thought it was really important that my team get to practice writing these user stories for their team members, writing documentation for future developers, and considering all that goes into that. So it's not enough just to write it down. Each team member is also responsible for communicating anything that they've learned while talking to the client and anything they've learned while they've written up their documentation. We didn't want any knowledge silos, and we didn't want any of this learning to happen in a vacuum. So it's up to them to figure out what the best way is to distill that learning out to the rest of the team. And like I said before, one of my measures for a senior developer is making decisions and being held accountable to those decisions. So I thought it was really important that my team members get practice doing just that. So each member on the team they are a stakeholder in every decision related to their feature. They aren't the only stakeholder, they're not, final approval, the only person who makes a decision, but they are consulted on every decision, and if we go forward with their decision, they're held accountable to any tech debt or any timeline slippage that happens, and it really helps them think about trade-offs and risk when they're planning their feature. And finally, feature owners attend and they lead meetings related to their application area. This helps build domain expertise, facilitation skills, and honestly, confidence. It also had the added benefit on my team of helping everyone understand when a meeting is actually valuable or when you just send everybody an email, because we don't all need to sit in the room. Cool. So as we're going through this, I wanted to make sure that my team understood what this role and what these responsibilities were not. So they are not the sole owner and decision maker of their feature area. They'd be supported by me, they'd be supported by our product owner, they'd be supported by the rest of the team. And in the same way that as a lead, I'm not writing all the code for the application and for my project, they are not writing all the code for their feature. So they need to make sure that when they're doing their documentation, when they're doing the knowledge sharing, when they're talking to the client, they're aware that they aren't the one who's going to code it, and they need to make sure that they communicate everything in a way that anyone on the team could code it. So the third and final step is just to put this into practice. This is the part I'm going to gloss over real quick, I promise. So basically on my team, every epic, we pick out some work streams, some high-level features, and we assign who's going to work on that. And we try to give everybody a 2 to 3 sprint runway to know hey, this is coming up. You're going to have to communicate, figure things out, and make sure that we're going to have everything we need when this kicks off. In terms of documentation, we're pretty informal. But we found that keeping track of what open questions we have with the client and what's been answered has been really helpful, so that if anyone goes on PTO or if the client decides, well, I'm only going to email 2 of you or I'm going to jump in and do a Slack DM, the whole team knows where to refer to for oh, hey, I know you still owe us answers on this stuff. And like I said, we are informal. So my team member, Sasha, actually put together, she just takes pictures of our whiteboards and then writes up some bullet points to explain what decisions were made during that conversation, which has been super helpful because then she can just drop that into Slack and say, here's an architecture diagram, here's the decisions we made. If you have any questions, let me know. But sometimes that's not enough. Sometimes we actually do need a meeting, and so it's on the feature owner to figure out hey, a diagram's not going to be enough, or a Slack message is not going to be enough. And so here you can also see Sasha being we're using all these classes wrong, and we need to have a meeting because I need to remind all of you what the actual responsibilities of these classes are so that I can make sure that I'm not incurring a bunch of tech debt when we wrap my feature. And like I mentioned before, they're also responsible for doing all the documentation and writing the user story so that anyone on the team can pick up the card. Shamail is our best story writer. I use him as an example all the time. He puts so much detail into them. But you can see that this is his responsibility. He has to go in and break down his feature into bite-sized chunks, give all the information, and make sure that if anybody were to pick it up, they wouldn't need to rely on him to be there to explain it. And throughout the duration of us working on any one feature, the feature owner is responsible for continuing the dialogue with the client, so it's not just a one and done. Sometimes it's super simple and it's just following up on questions, but like I mentioned before, it's also getting used to holding other people accountable to things they've promised us, which it's been really interesting to see. It's a little uncomfortable for people to start doing at first. So what are we learning? Delegating's really, really hard. It's something I'm still working on, but I think if you are committed as a lead to make sure that you're giving your team these opportunities, you have to be aware of it constantly, and you have to just be committed to not doing things yourself and making sure that you overly communicate to others what you expect, how they can do it, and giving them feedback and support while they do it. Feedback is really, really important. So feedback is I'll get on my soapbox. I don't think we do it enough anywhere. So first and foremost, I think we need to give more compliments and more praise. You want to make sure that you're giving your team feedback about what they're doing that's amazing and what they should continue doing, and that you recognize it, you value it, and you don't want them to stop. You also want to make sure that you're fighting that imposter syndrome, because as a woman and just as somebody who remembers what it was like starting out in this career, it can be really easy to question everything you do and to get in your head that you're not doing a good job. You also want to make sure that you're giving constructive feedback so that your team's continuing to grow. But if you make giving and receiving feedback just a normal everyday occurrence, that constructive feedback doesn't become scary, and it can just become an everyday thing that you do with your team, and your team's going to start growing by leaps and bounds because they're getting that instantaneous, timely, specific feedback that's letting them take baby steps to just keep moving forward. And also remember to solicit feedback. So just because you're the senior or the lead, you're not perfect, you don't know everything, and your team's going to have a lot of suggestions for how you can support them better. One of the pieces of feedback that I got from a team member was that I couldn't just throw a meeting on her calendar and expect her to be fine in front of a client. She wanted to spend a little time prepping beforehand. So that was super valuable for me, because now I bake in an extra 15 minutes for just the two of us before a meeting, so that she makes sure she knows the agenda, she knows what the purpose of the meeting is, and just to give her some guardrails as she works on those skills. I've also been learning when to offer support and when to take a step back. A lot of times it's as simple as asking how much, and I'm going to come back to offering this idea of support, but as a lead, it's just really important that you make sure you're not suffocating your team, but also that you are present and you are there if they need you. And finally, just remember to check in with your team members as they move through this process. It can be really easy to make assumptions about the types of challenges each team member is ready for, but they know themselves best. So check in with them, how they're feeling, what skills they want to work on, and then incorporate that into as you continue to iterate on this process. Awesome. The nuts and bolts, the step-by-step guide. How can you bring this framework to your team? So, prepare, propose, practice. I'll break it down. The whole point of this is to make sure that this isn't a one-size-fits-all. what works for my team might not work for yours. So I'm hoping that I'm giving you what you need to make sure that what you make is specific to you as a lead, your style, and what your team needs. So first, identify the skills that you, your team, and your company value in your senior engineers. Here's just some ideas just to get you started. This is not comprehensive by any means. But it might be technical ability, database design, learning React, software testing. Maybe, you go to the algorithm SIG group and you really want people to get into algorithms. Technical communication. Time management. This one is a personal one for me. I want to know that if I give a task to a senior engineer, I know that it'll be done within the estimated amount of time and it'll be communicated if it's not. Product vision, mentorship. I really value mentorship. I want to know that they're going to support the less experienced engineers on the project. Consulting, and then client engagement. I'm a consultant. Being client-facing is really important in my role, so I need a senior engineer who can also do that. But from those skills, identify which ones you want to encourage and grow on your team. So you may identify skills that your team's already doing, so you don't need to focus on those. Or you may find skills where you're like, we really, really value this, but we have a skill gap, so this is the one I want to invest in. So these are some questions I asked myself to kind of help that process. So how are you as a lead, a silo on the team? What skills would be helpful if your team also had them so that you could give them your responsibilities? What skills do you wish your team got to practice? What skills are needed for individuals to level up? If your company has a very specific career ladder and you have a clear rubric for what it takes to get to the next level, you can look at your team and go, oh, hey, I know that here are the places you need to grow and you need to grow, so we're gonna start focusing on them as a team. And while you're doing this, you wanna make sure that the project or the product that you're working on, the scope is big enough to accommodate starting to share all this responsibility. Because we've all run into the too many cooks in the kitchen problem where it's just too small to have that many people with that many hands in the code and that many emails flying back and forth to the client. So this does kind of only work on larger projects or with smaller teams. Next, you want to define your purpose. So you want it narrow enough to be clear, but broad enough that there are a lot of different opportunities for your team to grow. So if you notice for us, we don't call out anything technical here. Honestly, my team was getting plenty of practice with just the scale of our project. We didn't need to spend time specifically on that. But you'll also notice that I didn't just say soft skills, right? I really want them to focus in on specific things to level up on. From there, you want to decide what responsibilities you are going to share with your team that will help achieve that purpose. And the key part is will help achieve your purpose. Don't just make them do your busy work. So again, I like questions to help me narrow stuff down, so these might help you as well. What responsibilities satisfy one or more of the skill areas you chose to focus on? What types of tasks would serve the purpose you identified? And what responsibilities do you have as a lead that everyone on the team can realistically share? And what responsibilities do you find challenging to keep up with? With my team, when we were at 10 people, we paired, but that was still 5 work streams at a time, so that was 5 features at a time. There was no way I could keep all of those conversations with the client straight and keep track of okay, for feature A, these are the requirements, and for feature B, these are the requirements, and I need to start writing the stories for A, B, C, and D, but E is already done, and that can, no, I couldn't do it. So if you can't keep up with it, it's a great one to share with your team. I found that somewhere between 3 and 7 responsibilities is the sweet spot, Any less than that, and it becomes really easy for your team to just kind of ignore and assume that they're working on them. And anything more than that, it's really difficult to focus on and just remember in your head. It helps to write it out, and I like Venn diagrams because when I see responsibilities start to overlap, I know that that's a really good candidate for us to work on because it's going to achieve more parts of my purpose. It also is really nice if you can write it down and keep it defined. It makes it easier to track growth. And our performance reviews have gotten really, really nice and easy where everyone can reflect on, this is what I was working on. This is, the team has a shared vocabulary, and we can talk about how different people have leveled up in these different skill areas. And I can't say it enough, you need to get ready to delegate. If you're gonna roll something like this out to your team, you have to be ready to let go and give them the space they need to be successful. So now it's time to propose this to your team. Tell them about it. Schedule time with your team. Don't be afraid to have fun with it. Frameworks and step-by-step guides can feel really formal. I know, I just really like them. But when I introduced this to the team, I used a Wizard of Oz themed keynote. And the final slide was this, where we were taking a journey to Oz, which was the project is done, and here are all of the different features that they're going to own. So make sure that you're soliciting feedback from your team while you're doing this. They can have a lot of ideas about, I'm not challenged enough, or this is really intimidating, this is what I'm scared in, I'm going to need more support here, I'm not ready for this. You just want to make sure that you are giving them the space they need to talk about this new process, because change is scary. These are the questions that I use to kind of open that conversation up and get that feedback, because a lot of times when you're in a senior or lead role, people are scared to be honest with you. So are there skills that your team would like to practice that you didn't identify? Do they feel comfortable but challenged by their responsibilities? Is there anything that they want to add or clarify? And does your team feel that this implementation is sustainable? This last one's really important because, if they feel like, yeah, I can do it for 2 months, but then I'm going to get burned out, you probably put too much on their plate. But you also want to make sure that they are challenged, because if they're not challenged, they won't be growing. And finally, make sure you put it into practice. Delegate. And offer support. So I mentioned earlier that, I'm going to dig into this just a little bit, but there's a lot of different ways to offer support, and it is not, here, read this book. So it might be regular one-on-ones. This can be really great to provide a formal space for them to ask their questions and to get help on specific individualized things. But it could also be as simple as reading an email before they send it to a client to make sure that it is clear and the question that they're asking is actionable so that they'll get a response. It could be, like I mentioned before, prepping somebody before a meeting so that they feel prepared to, facilitate that agenda. It could also be pairing with them on story writing, because if somebody's never written a story for somebody else before, they might not know how big to make it, how small to make it, and you can either end up with one giant task that's like, make the applicant model. I don't know what that is. Or you can have somebody who's like, put this link here, put that link there, make the button blue, and you're like, okay, yeah, that's too many stories. Same thing with data architecture stuff. For people who have never done data modeling on their own before, it can be helpful to just sit in a room and whiteboard with them. So especially the first 2 times you put that on their plate, offer to pair with them and work through that problem with them. And then this is just a little hack, if you will. I find it super helpful when somebody's doing something they've never done before to send them a calendar invite just to set an expectation of how long you think it should take. I've noticed that there are some early career devs who will spend 3 days on something that should have only taken them 2 hours because they want to do a really good job. Or absolutely the opposite, where they didn't realize how big the task actually was, and they did it in 15 minutes and threw it in Jira, and you're like, I don't know what this is. So a calendar invite can set a clear expectation, like, hey, I expect this to take you 3 hours, about, like, a little more, a little less is cool, but don't spin your wheels on it. Give them reminders about deadlines. You're going to be putting a lot more on their plate that they're not used to. And so it can just be helpful to say, like, hey, remember you promised this thing by Friday. It's Wednesday. I'm just checking in to see how it's going. But above all, you want to make sure that you're offering individualized support. Every person on your team is different, and they're going to need support in different areas. We all have different strengths and weaknesses. And to actually get them to grow, you need to make sure that you are supporting them where they need it and not just a one-size-fits-all model. Cool. So our industry is missing out on so much talent because we don't do enough to support the growth of those early in their career. We all need to do our part to empower early career developers and grow them into the amazing seniors and leads we all know that they can be. Thanks.
Do we have any questions?
So how do you track progress of early career developers if they're on that journey to becoming a senior?
Yeah, for sure. So the question was, how do you track the progress of early career developers? Some things that I do is I keep an Evernote notebook for each one of my team members. I track what we talk about in one-on-ones. Every time they lead a meeting or they deliver something, I put my feedback in there before I send it to them so that I remember it, which helps me come review time. And we do reviews every 6 months. And so now that I've got 6 months worth of feedback, plus I've outlined here are the skill areas we're working on, I can kind of use that. Also, our 6 months reviews are peer reviews, and so everybody's kind of adopted a similar framework of I know what our goals are and what we're all working on, and so you can kind of reflect every 6 months on that. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
Do you pay attention to, or is there value in providing opportunities for failure?
So the question is there value in providing opportunities for failure? Absolutely, within reason. So I try to always give my engineers space for if they make a decision, I will tell them, here are some trade-offs and here are my concerns. And a lot of times my team is very confident and they'll go, I hear you, but I still think it'll work. And at that point, that's when I go, okay. Because then in 2 weeks, when we're fighting against a design choice because it's not very flexible, that's when I can be like, hey, remember this thing? And they're like, yeah, I do. And then I'm like, cool, well, now you have to fix it. So they'll remember, like, yeah, this kind of sucked. But I would never take it to the point where I'm like, if the whole team is going to be affected by this for the next 6 months, or it's going to derail the project, or it's going to prevent us from delivering, that's when I kind of say, like, no, like, here's why we're not going to do that. But in, like, bite-sized chunks, I absolutely let them go down that path so they can learn, like, where that pain comes from. Did that answer it?
Thank you.
Cool. Anything else?
Any other questions?
Well, thank you for oh, yeah, what's up?
So probably like get my manager to start doing
Yes! So the question was, how do I get my manager to start doing these things? And this is a question I get every time I give this talk or a variation of it. I don't know. So what I've noticed is that if you can, being a manager, if people can tell me what they need and what support looks like from me as the manager, it's so much easier for me to do my job. So if in your next one-on-one you could tell your manager, hey, I really want to practice leading a meeting. So like, can I lead our internal estimation meeting? Or I want to practice my written communication skills. Can I send that email and have you read it before I send it? The more specific you can be is really, really helpful. And especially if your manager is not willing to do stuff like this or just not aware of it. And then I think you can get bigger and broader and start talking about, like, I want to get better at mentorship, or I want to get better technically, and so I need more opportunities there. But I would start small and specific so that you can build on it. That answer it?
Can you talk about some of like the specifics of like your team and how they've like how this has affected them and made them better?
So specifics of my team, how this has affected them and made them better. Yes. So right now we are 6, 7, depending on the week. Since we've put this in place, we've seen one person get promoted from junior to mid, which has been great because a big part of that review was talking about he needed specifically to level up on his written communication and his verbal communication. And by doing this, he had all of the ammo he needed to say, like, look at what I've done, here are the things, and like all of my peers can point to it too because they know that I owned this feature and they saw all of my communication with the client. We've also had other people who haven't necessarily made the jump, but who they've transitioned to other projects or, you know, whatever. And now we've got our client engagement managers are more willing to put them in front of the client, which has been really nice. They're more outspoken and they're leading, kind of giving tech talks in our internal, we call them dev dish, but like lunch and learn type things where they were kind of afraid to speak up before. And so we're seeing a lot more confidence and ownership, and it's having a ripple effect in the team at large, like not just my project team, but the entire development team.
Awesome.
Was that specific enough?
That was very specific.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Right.
Sweet. Thank you all. If you have any more questions, I'll be getting a beer.
Thank you.